everybody, and welcome to the virtual edition of our year-round member screening series, Film Independent Presents. I'm Lisa Haskell, Director of Artist Development at Film Independent. Before we get started, I'd like to make a special mention to our loyal supporters. Thank you to our incredible lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, our screening partner, Vision Media, and our media partner, the Los Angeles Times. And I'm so pleased to introduce you and to be with here today, Director Garrett Bradley, who directed the feature Time.
Hey.
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to speak with you and everyone who's watching. Thank y'all for joining.
First, the film is fantastic. I'm going to gush over it because it's just so beautiful and powerful and touching. But I have first maybe a personal antidote is that I saw your short film at Concordia Studios when Roddy invited me and some of the artist development folks over to see it. So the short film is it Alone or LNA?
Yeah, Alone.
Alone. So do you want to describe that a little bit? Because I feel like it's the good lead in to how you came to Time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad that you saw it.
It's beautiful. And it's available on New York Times Op Doc, so you should watch it.
Yes, it is. And I actually always, whenever I talk about that film, I mention to people that, anybody who's watching right now can go on the New York Times Op Docs page and submit an idea. So, I didn't know anyone at the New York Times. I didn't have any relationships there at all. I think most of my projects have really come from responding to my immediate surroundings, responding to the people who are actually in my life. And Alone, actually, just really quickly, I'll mention it came to be out of another project that I had made called Below Dreams, which was my first feature-length narrative film, and which premiered in 2014 at Tribeca. And that film was almost cast entirely from Craigslist in New Orleans. And so I met a lot of people in the process of making that film, and we stayed in each other's lives. And so Desmond is in Below Dreams, and was he when he was arrested, he had basically was awaiting trial for about a year and a half in a private prison, which is just unconstitutional. And there are many people that are in that situation. And Lon, his partner, who is also a really good friend of mine, she essentially became a single mother overnight. She's my age. She'd never dealt with the prison system, like the system at all, and was very new to it. And there was a sort of, I think, a light bulb moment of witnessing her isolation in the midst of not feeling like she could go to many people to talk, to get resources, or even just to talk through what that isolation was because of the stigma around incarceration. And so I had actually conceived of that film initially as being a series of conversations between her and other women of other generations who were also in incarcerated families, incarcerated relationships. And so I contacted an organization called FLIC, Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. And Gina Womack, who's the co-founder and director of that organization, picked up, and she said, the first person you have to speak with is Fox Rich. And so I met Fox in the making of Alone, and she is very briefly at the end of that film and makes a really vivid connection between slavery and the prison industrial complex. And so, it's like these are like three projects that all blend into one another, and the same people are in all of the films pretty much that I've made in one way or another. And I didn't go into it thinking I want to make films about the prison industrial complex, but I think that there's 2.3 million people that are incarcerated. So there's, if not double, triple, quadruple that number, who are serving time on the outside, who are affected by this. And it is actually kind of an unavoidable issue, at least in my life. And so, yeah, they all kind of fall into each other.
And it seems like you said you weren't necessarily searching for the subject matter, but you were surrounded by people and meeting people and wanting to tell their stories from this really personal, intimate level. And one thing kind of led to another through the stories, chaining them all together. So with Time, did you originally think you were going to do another short, or did it always feel like a feature? Because I read somewhere that the home video material didn't come to you until way later in the game, or significantly later in the game.
Yeah, no, I was like, I was so adamant that it was another 13-minute film. I was just like, and I think that part of that adamance was also my stubbornness of like, why are feature length films like more important, or like why does it have to be a feature in order for people to be excited about it, you know? And that's a whole other conversation. But ultimately what really I think was revealing and was like, you can't get out of this, frankly, was, yeah, when Fox handed me 100 hours worth of her personal archive, which I had no idea existed while I was shooting the film. And myself and Gabe Rhodes, who cut the film, we just had to like completely reorient our brains, and so much of the aesthetics and the tone and the feel and the sort of formal approaches that I had developed with Alone were just immediately extrapolated, and I shot it exactly the same way with Time,
Mhm.
because in my mind I was making a sister film. It was a companion piece. The two always needed to exist together. I still hope that's the case, even though one is longer than the other. But yeah, I mean, it was we had to radically it was very clear it wasn't going to be 13 minutes long. It was going to be much longer than 13 minutes. And there's a lot of things I could say about that. How we
Well, her
tackled
her
it.
material is her material is beautiful and it fits so well with your aesthetic. So was it all black and white, or did you change it to black and white?
Yeah, it was all color. It was all like
Wow.
beautiful, super lush color.
Hmm.
And you know, I mean, there were certain things that I think were really cosmic. You know, about like where Fox placed the camera, you know, 19 years before I had met her, and where I had placed my camera, and just like some of these formal connections between the footage over time that were just really kind of unexplainable. Um, but you know, aesthetically and tonally, there it was hugely different. You know, like it was completely different, and so you know, making the whole thing black and white, we went back and forth with it quite a bit, but ultimately it was what I had always intended, you know, again, because Alone is in black and white. And also because I felt that from from a structural standpoint, when we were cutting the film, you know, the whole goal was to try to think about how can we have the story be moving forward, even though we're also coming backwards at the same time, right? And
Hmm.
how can, I think, from a more like esoteric place, how can the film feel the same way that memories feel? How can they really elicit real life in this? Like when we remember something, there's no distinction between the past and the future. Like it becomes the present moment, you know? And
Hmm.
how can the film elicit that same thing? And I think the black and white helped that, but it also was us just deciding like we're not going to actually think about chronology. We're going to think about love, you know? And I know that sounds like really hippy dippy, but it ultimately was like, you know, love surpasses all time and space. It's not bound by chronology, it's not linear. And so that allowed us then to bounce in and out of time and in and out of the footage, because we were harnessed in something that didn't require that same kind of logic, you know?
Yeah, I loved how it jumped back and forth, and you can see the kids reflected, when they were younger without their dad and getting older and older, but still going back and forth. You're right, like memories are. And I love the concept of time. So when you went into it, I mean, that's a recurring theme, obviously, throughout the film, whether it's the passage of time, or her working towards something over time, or her kids growing up over time without their father. So was this, when you went into it, the structure that you wanted to give it, the thematic kind of poetic structure that you wanted to give it, or did that come out when you were filming and recognizing all of these, that passage of time and those memories?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think you know, every film that I make, I want it to feel like a reflection of the content. You know, like I want the form to be a reflection of the subject matter, and in that way, it's completely unique. But I was also riffing off of these sort of pre-established ideas and aesthetics from Alone, and so I think that you know, there were certain so I think the best way to answer that question also is that like when I'm about to embark on a project, it's really important for me to have a very frank conversation with people and saying, do you want to make a film together? Why do you want to make a film together? What are your hopes for it? Because I think anyone who's willing to have a camera around with them, it's clearly because they have something to say, and it's because they feel that what they need to say needs to be heard and that it can offer something. And so I need to know as a filmmaker what that is, so that I know, one, if I'm in alignment with that, and
Mhm.
two, it also really helps inform not only the intentionality, which then carries itself all the way through the distribution of the film, right? That intention never should ever leave the project, but it also then helps me translate that into a visual space of saying, okay, well, then what does that mean if I have to show that in two-dimensional space, one frame at a time? How am I going to show that? And so my focus was, at first really about, before the archive existed, before I knew the archive existed, I was really focused on daily life, and like on Fox at work, and like the boys in their own worlds at school, personal time, certain things that I thought would help show people at a bare minimum how the system unequivocally embeds itself into daily life. And so it was very focused on the present,
Mhm.
and that's where, like, when we're sitting with her on hold, as you said, that's a way in which we're experiencing time. But what I lacked, what I was really, the big challenge was, time again is 360 degrees, like, and I was all I had was the current moment and the hope for a future, but there was no proof or evidence or for the past, or understanding even fully of the past, right? So there wasn't the same way of being able to prove the evolution and sort of revolution that existed within Fox and within the family over time. It was very difficult to show, I think, what it means to hold on to your individuality as a human within the system, and also, frankly, what the power of unity was over the course of 21 years. Because
Mhm.
I think that to me is the biggest takeaway, is like, people may watch this film and say, well, this family is so exceptional, how can it be universal, how can everybody relate to it? But I think, in my mind, it's like, holding on to your loved ones is something that's very mundane, but is also one of the most powerful forms of resistance that we have tried to hold on to as Black people in America since the beginning of time. And so the archive helped shape a lot of those challenges and created new opportunities too.
I think that became very clear, like when you're following Fox, who is a fantastic, strong character. She's now my personal hero. She's amazing. Just her perseverance. And, like I really think maybe had she not been so driven by maintaining that unity and working towards that, who knows if the family would have stuck together like that. Like she really felt like the glue. But that was the last thing I kind of wrote down, was just this, that black joy as resistance. And when you see her just screaming at the top of her lungs at the end, it's just, and the joy that the family experiences after of being together again, it made me think of that. Like that's the resistance, is like you said, keeping your identity and, making it through, and perseverance. So that really came through to me. um I wanted to talk a little bit more about Fox. So, was she a character? I mean, she's very outward facing. So, was that a fairly easy job you had to do in getting her to, let you in and be part of their family essentially for a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, so much of, I think, making a film is like about energy work, it's really about the energy you're bringing to spaces that are often very small and that are interior, and I think people, we're animals, and like the, I think anyone will tell you when they don't follow their instincts, like things get fucked up. You know what I mean? Like we have instincts for a reason, and I think that it is what allowed the film to be what it is that she and I both, I think, um, not even just she and I, myself and the entire family, we all were really clear about what we were doing, like why we were doing it. I think that we were constantly checking each other out and evaluating each other in terms of the energy that we were bringing to a space. But again, it goes back to this question of intentionality. And like, I understood what their intention was in wanting to make this film. in the same way that they understood my intention behind it, and that we were always on the same page. Like the trust and the vulnerability and the transparency needs to come both ways, you know what I mean? In order to make something that's really honest, and
Hmm.
profound to a certain extent. So, I think that that's ultimately what helped us achieve what we did, was that it was just being honest, and sometimes being honest and being transparent also is like not knowing what you're not knowing everything, when Fox would ask me, like, what are you going to call the film? Or where is it going to go after the film is done? I mean, there were things I couldn't answer,
Hmm.
and I think that as a filmmaker, it's important to be honest about what you have control over, what you know, and what you don't, and again, I just can't emphasize enough, that's where intentionality is your leading guide. It is your North Star. It's the thing that gets you through the whole process, because so much else you don't have control over and you don't know, you know?
I feel like you're just the right amount of hippy dippy for me. Like I'm, I'm totally agreeing with when you were saying how the cameras were placed, and I mean, it just seems fated, and your energies working together. It just seems like it was a really good match. So, you said you met Fox when you were filming Alone. Did you? Who came to who first with this idea of making this film?
I came to her, I mean, I had already been thinking about, like, when Alone came out, I was thinking about, I had really wanted to try to extend the conversation around incarceration, from a sort of Black feminist point of view, from a familial point of view, from a domestic point of view. And because she and I had already kind of developed a relationship, we kind of fell into this really naturally, And I don't remember like exactly, I think it was like a series of conversations around like, what would that mean? What would that look like? It resonated with her, and then I think I went back to the New York Times and said, I'm thinking about doing this other short film. Is that something you guys would be interested in? And then when we got the green light to do that, it kind of became a real thing, And then Concordia Studios was they're still a new company, a new studio. They were already in conversation with the New York Times. And they were also developing a fellowship that was very focused on filmmakers kind of evaluating where they are in their practice and in their craft, and trying to get a sense of like where their glass ceiling was, And I think I was certainly at a place where like I'd made all of my films like out of my bedroom, like cutting them in my bedroom. I've worked with the same like 3 or 4 people over and over again. I knew that I needed to like open up the collaborative process in order to like expand my practice, And so that also came at a really perfect time where they were able to facilitate like really concrete hands-on things that I needed in order to make the film that I wanted to make.
That was going to be one of my other questions because I know Concordia and Roddy from when she was at Sundance, and so
Yeah.
was there around when they were first starting out, and you're one of those filmmakers that they had identified as just like an amazing new voice that they wanted to support. And I'm so glad to see that they, have followed through with that support, and
Yeah.
you guys have collaborated on this amazing film. Um, I know it's kind of difficult to get noticed by Concordia. So, is there any advice that you would give to filmmakers about ways that they could interact or work with the team there?
Hmm, that funny. I didn't know that. So obviously, I guess. Well, I mean, I can speak from my experience, which is that, what helped me um, begin a dialogue with them was my kind of going out on a whim and submitting my ideas to OpDocs,
Mhm.
without knowing. I didn't have any connections there. My parents are both painters. I don't know, like, I didn't know anyone in the film industry, you know what I mean? In the documentary world at all. And I think also just being a woman, being a Black woman, it's like I know I've always wanted to make films. I've been making films since I was in high school, but you're not, I didn't like necessarily have a group of people who were like, yeah, like let's go make films together. I think this is very gendered, but just speaking from my own experience, like being a woman it can be a real space of solitude, you know, working in film. And really what that meant for me was just like, by all means necessary, finding a way to make films. It's why I went to graduate school. Like, a lot of people are like, do I go to graduate school, do I not? For me, it was less about whether it was going to make me a filmmaker. It was more about like, how can I get my hands on cameras, how can I work with people to help me make my films, and I can help them make films. How can I have mentors who know about film, you know? um, and I just kept doing that. And, you know, and I have been really fortunate to be able to get my work made, but it started off with me really believing in myself. And I think that like, it sounds stupid. It sounds like it's like a cop out, but I really just think you have to believe in what you're doing and not try to fit into a box, you know, like don't look at what films are winning awards or what films are getting distribution and think you need to make a film like that. Like, people don't know what they want until they see it, you know, so you have to be the one to create that. And, you know, if I didn't know Concordia, but I knew of Concordia, I would probably do the wrong thing and like email them and be like, yo, like, you want to watch my film? I don't know, but that's probably really bad advice. And I should probably ask Roddy and people at Concordia, how do you guys want people to reach out to you, you know?
We do bring her into the documentary lab, and I'm just thinking as I'm talking to you and listening to you, you're really inspiring to listen to, and definitely want to have you come to our documentary lab and talk to our fellows at some point,
Oh,
because
oh, thank you.
just saying, like, sticking to your, you know, your story and the things that you want to tell, and not holding yourself up to this, like, what's popular out there for the filmmakers that have been making films forever and get most of the money, and we know who those filmmakers are. So just hearing from someone like you who's really stuck to um, her purpose and her views, and it's just good advice. One question I had before, I think we might move into questions from the audience soon, but just wanted to ask, so Fox, as an abolitionist, you know, she's an activist, she's out there in the community. I'm wondering if this film, we talk a lot about social impact in docs, in the doc world. Just wondering if you guys had discussed, whether it's with Concordia or just you yourself, what kind of impact you want this film to have and Alone to have. Like, are you taking it out into the world, into, you know, communities who are adversely affected by, you know, the horrors of the prison system?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's why we made the film, you know, right? And I think, again, like, not to sound like a broken record, but again, like, what is the intention for why you're wanting to make something is what feeds into its release, like into how you want it to be brought into the world. And so when in that conversation, I mean, Fox and the family were very clear, like, our story, they felt our story is the story of 2.3 million other American families. And we think this film can offer hope to those who are immediately affected by it, and also insight to those who know very little about it. And so hope is kind of can be very vague, you know, and I think for me as a filmmaker, then I, again, had to kind of translate that into filmic language and say, well, how is that articulated in their story? How can I make sure that's clear in the film itself? And then how do we think about that in the conversation and the messaging of how the film then gets brought out into the world? And for me, it really, again, goes back to these sort of three very kind of mundane, but critical forms of resistance, historical forms of resistance, which go into performance, right? How one presents themselves in their individuality, that as a form of both oppression and resistance that we can track from the beginning of time in the country, one's ability to stay connected to those they love within the prison system, a system that is intended to systematically separate Black families since, again, the beginning of time in the country. And then love and the power of love. And so those three things, I think, for me, there's two different ways of answering your question, which is, you know, Fox and Rob have their own initiatives that are around participatory defense, their own activism that they're doing throughout the country, and being able to use the film as a tool to initiate that conversation within their own community and those beyond that. And that's something that is really important to me that they lead. You know, that's not something I'm leading. What I'm leading is the conversation from a filmmaker's point of view, which is, how can I think about image making and the optics around incarceration as a way to further the conversation and also add an additional entry point for it. You know, when we think about all of the uprisings that happened this summer, when we think about the unprecedented amount of white allyship um, that we're experiencing right now, a lot of that has to do with technology and visibility around police brutality, which we've had since Emmett Till, which we've had this, right? But it is at an nth degree. It's at a new degree. For me, what that has also illuminated is the lack of visibility that exists within the prison system. That we don't have evidence for 2.3 million Americans that are incarcerated, and in many cases, the only way in which we witness what is happening is through the family, is through those that are on the outside. And so part of my part of my answer to your question is I hope that the film can show the effects of the facts, right? It can offer another entry point to the conversation from a deeply personal and human perspective. Um, and I hope to continue that, you know, and I think artists and filmmakers, this is a moment where we I think we need to think about visibility and erasure. And we think about the Vietnam War, like the reason why people were out there protesting is because they could actually see war for the first time. And we live in a world of green screens now, you know. We live in a world where like it's very easy for the facts and the numbers even to be abstract, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We need more examples of the human experience. So we're working together to make both of those kind of happen simultaneously.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think of all of us who have, you know, experienced this COVID time, and one thing that came out for me was just that holding on to family and loved ones became so obvious and so important during this time. And so maybe that's an offshoot of hope, like you were talking about. It feels vague sometimes, but maybe those moments are, you know, can make us realize what's important.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, well, I'm going to open it up to questions. See if I can do this. Okay, this kind of goes to impact what we were talking about. It's, do you have any direct action initiatives related to prison reform organized around the film's release?
Well, we're sharing the film with prisons throughout the country, men and women's prisons, and a lot of that conversation, you know, it's part of that conversation has been, you know, the ending of this film is not everyone's ending. It's not everyone's reality. And so it's really more about trying to focus the conversation around the connectivity and unity of families and to really try to create more visibility around how difficult that can be. How prohibitive it can be from a cost standpoint, from a physical standpoint, the way in which technology and private companies really interfere with the ability for families to stay together in a real way.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're also very much, you know, we're creating civic guides and we're working again with Fox and Rob through their own organizational efforts that come out of Louisiana, but then also brought into other parts of the country throughout that are specifically focused on participatory defense. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and again, those are things that I am also participating in and that the film team is participating in. But it is really important that Fox and Rob and the family, I think, lead that conversation to the extent that they want to, which has been an ongoing part of the conversation. Um, so that it isn't, so the film is a tool. It's not the thing that stands in front of anybody or any conversation.
Mm-hmm. Um, Another one that kind of veers away from. Okay, so this one is, can you describe any sort of institutional support you received to help make the film?
Well, so the film is a co-production between the New York Times OpDocs and Concordia Studios. And then we also did the Sundance Editing Lab over the summer, which was amazing. And I believe, I could be wrong, I think that the lab is just open to features.
I'm
Um,
pretty sure, yeah, just features.
yeah, so that
Mm-hmm.
was that was my first time working doing that, and it was really amazing because you're working with other filmmakers who are in similar stages of the process with you, you know, And for a lot of us, you may not, I at least didn't necessarily always have, as I mentioned earlier, a community of people. My editor was in New York, for instance. I was in Louisiana. Like, it can be hard to bring people together to watch stuff and talk through things. And in a place of real like safety and insecurity,
Yeah.
which is a huge, and it also brings up, I mean, I think that like opening up the conversation in a sort of controlled environment like a lab like that can also be really amazing, because the questions and the conversations that you end up having also become sort of a reflection of where we are in the world right now, where institutions are even within their own ecosystem. I think if done and sort of facilitated properly, and Tabitha Jackson and Kristen Feely were huge parts of like really being, I think, incredible creative leaders and allies that really challenged us. It wasn't just like everyone like loving on each other and calling each other, like just saying everyone's the best. It was like very difficult conversations. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I highly encourage what you're saying in terms of for filmmakers to apply for those fellowships and labs. We have several at Film Independent, including a documentary lab. They really are dedicated space to take a deep dive into both the creative aspects of your film and kind of the business of filmmaking. The edit lab obviously is specific to editing, but each lab has its kind of its own personality and focus. But it's a great time to have colleagues that know your film and know you to go through the process with, and have a peer group that you can then move forward together in your filmmaking career. So yes, definitely encourage, if there's any filmmakers out there listening, to apply for those labs and fellowships. One thing I didn't ask, that this is a good question, is about the music. So talk a little bit about the music and how you came to that, because it was really beautiful throughout.
Yeah, thank you. I came across, she goes by Emma Hoy. Emma Hoy, she's a 96-year-old Ethiopian nun. She's still alive. She came from a very well-off family in Ethiopia, and then was a prisoner of war, and was classically trained in Western music. Um, and really made a choice. She was like a prodigy, and she made a choice not to become a famous pianist, but to go back to Ethiopia and essentially and become a nun, and really like created her own genre of music, which is this like amazing blending of like Western and Ethiopian melody. And she recorded this one album in 1963 for the purpose of raising money for an orphanage. And that album is what popped up in my algorithm on my YouTube feed, and like fell in love with it. I just completely
Mm-hmm.
fell in love with the music, and we put it to picture to kind of feel it out, and it created this beautiful sense. It really reinforced this level of like visual linearity that we wanted to explore. But it wasn't, I think, until I really started to read about who she was, who Emma Hoy was, that it felt to me again like one of these cosmic connections of being able to bring her and Fox together in time and space, and that felt incredibly special. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
real.
yeah, it's gorgeous music, and it just really adds to the poetry of the entire film. It's gorgeous. Um, okay, there is a question about the question is, I'd like to talk about the reaction. So what have some of the reactions been about your film, both good and bad? I think they're asking.
um, well, I think
I've read pretty good reviews, so I don't know.
yeah, I think we've been lucky to have gotten. I mean, the film just came out on Friday,
Yeah.
so it's kind of to be seen, like the people's opinion,
Mhm.
and we did a lot of like kind of community screenings and festival screenings leading up to it, which was really great. But I think so. Part of my answer is like we'll see, I think from a like sort of critic standpoint, yeah, we've been really blessed for people to have, I think, received the film, to really feel the intention which we made the film with, but I think whether a review is bad or good, again, it's a reflection of the temperature of the
Mhm.
country. It's a temperature read of our society. And so I think it's insight to a certain extent, no matter what. And I try as much as possible to use those as prompts for how we can continue a dialogue. That it isn't a matter of just saying, I like it, I don't like it, it's good or it's bad. I mean, if it was as simple as that, I don't think there wouldn't be much impetus for wanting to make films. It's so much more nuanced than that. For
Right. And you want to challenge people's views. I think it might also point to kind of a systemic problem or issue within how films are reviewed and who reviews them. So there is a serious lack of people of color who are reviewers, for example, doing reviews. So I don't know if that has anything directly tied into this, but it just made me think of that, and who reviews and
Yeah.
how they review it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it does kind of bring up, like, there has been a really interesting conversation that it's brought up in terms of, like, when we're making films about incarceration, there have been a lot of questions of, like, why aren't you getting into the minutia of the legal system or the
Mm,
minutia of the plea deals. And I think that's a really important question, because it offers an opportunity, I think, for there to be a conversation around the many ways in which we need to tackle the same issue, that I feel like time stands on the shoulders of 13th,
yeah.
and they are two completely different films formally in terms of their approach, but you really need the two to exist in the world together, um, and so I think that's also something that has really been reinforced in the process of the response that we've gotten for the film.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need different vantage points to reach different people, and you need kind of the statistical, legal information about it all, but you also need these like personal, character-driven humans that you can attach to and say, okay, this is the fallout from these legal and statistical
Yeah.
things. Um, let's see. Do-do-do. Well, scrolling through. Oh, how did Amazon become attached? Good question. So you premiered at Sundance,
Yeah.
and was that connection made through Sundance?
Yeah. So Ted Hope acquired the film on Amazon's behalf, and Ted Hope, who's a legend in and of himself as a producer, um, and yeah, it was it was my first experience going through the selling process of a film. I mean, every time I've been at Sundance, it's been not like that at all. So it's like very different. um and yeah, I mean, I think that what was really important for me kind of at the end of the day, and I expressed to Ted, and I think he ultimately and Amazon ultimately really understood, was that um this is a mainstream conversation. It's a film that is not in any kind of way a minority. It's not small, it's not niche at all. And so it was important for me that the conversation be sort of put on a platform, regardless of how one wants to critique the platform in and of itself, which is totally valid and applies pretty much to everything we are absorbing right now or sort of consuming right now. That it be put in a space that is just so fully accessible and unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been really, really, really lucky that they really, when they said that they would let us collaborate with them, because that was also like a huge kind of like, I couldn't compromise on that in terms of how
Mm-hmm.
the film was going to be released. Being involved in like the cutting of the trailer, being involved in the poster, being involved in the Instagram account, like the overall messaging of the film. Every filmmaker might say, like, I want to be involved, and then either they realize they don't want to be involved or the distributor doesn't let them be involved. But we've been incredibly lucky that Amazon has been just such like true and very real collaborators with us. And the studio is actually a really small group of other creative people. So it's
Mm-hmm.
been really positive so far. Yeah.
That's great to hear. I wonder how that varies across different distributors in terms of how much they'll let you get involved into the messaging in the output, but that's really good to hear about Amazon. Okay, I'm going to get through a couple more. People really like asking you questions. Okay, so what was the editing process with the differences you mentioned between the footage you had and then the footage you received from Fox?
Okay, so um I was cutting a film that I thought was a 13-minute film. And then it was really clear that it was not a 13-minute film when 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 I was handed all of this footage, you know. And the process was, I mean, Gabe and I basically just, I mean, Gabe, I should mention too, he I had seen in one of his films at Sundance a few years prior, a documentary about MIA.
Oh, yeah.
And it was actually kind of amazing because there's a lot of really similar themes in those two films. You know, MIA is like she's a pop star, but she's also really politically oriented, and has an incredibly huge personal archive, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so there were a lot of like similar exciting possibilities and challenges that I think Gabe was like kind of keenly aware of and already sort of in tune with to a certain extent. Um, in terms of how to work with all of those different elements. And you know, we tried to just watch all of the footage, all of the archive, as well as the stuff that I had shot myself without any kind of agenda. Like really try to again go back, okay, what is the intention, but how do we stay as open-minded as possible about how that intention can be articulated in the footage, you know?
Mm-hmm.
um, and then you just start pulling things that you love. You know, I was pulling things that I loved for how they looked. He was, to be honest, he was pulling things for like what they meant. You know, and that was a sort of interesting like crossover. Like I think I always assumed that the way something, that the aesthetics offer emotion, you know, and I think he never takes that for granted and is always like, no, but you also need like something a bit more that isn't just evoking something, but that is the thing too.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so we just kept whittling it down until we had the things that were serving multiple purposes in terms of the visual space, in terms of the emotional space. And then it literally just came back down to that question of love and saying, how do we tell this love story, you know? And that is what really was our compass. It's what guided us to go back and forth and forward throughout the whole process.
Okay, I think we have to wrap up. So I'm gonna go on. The last question was, what are you working on? What's next?
Um, Well, I'm really, really excited for those of you who are in New York. If there's anyone in New York, or and if anyone plans on going to New York, I don't know where anyone is right now because everything's virtual. So, like out of your house, if you plan on leaving your house, I have my first solo exhibition that's at MoMA, that is opening November 21st. And that's a sort of institutional partnership with the Studio Museum in Harlem and MoMA. And I'll be, yeah, showing a project of mine called America that was inspired by a 1913 film starring Burt Williams, called Limekin Club Field Day, which the museum thinks is the very first film with an all black cast and integrated production team. And so I made a sort of visual chronology, a body of work, 12 sort of vignetted films that are combined into one. And it's sort of like history that you can walk through and move through that is evoking and sort of in honor and in spirit to Burt Williams and to that 1913 film. So it'll be up from November to March, and I'm really excited, really, really excited about that, and really proud to
Congratulations.
working
That
with all
sounds
the folks
amazing.
here. Yeah,
Yeah.
so come by.
Is this your first video art installation?
No, I had a show at CAM in Texas that was curated by Rebecca Madelon. That was the centerpiece of that was America, and then we screened Alone and AKA in two other rooms, and then America. The first showing of that piece was also in a group show called Bodies of Knowledge that was curated by Katie Full at the New Orleans Museum of Art. So this is its sort of third iteration, but the first time it's being presented in New York. And Thelma Golden is the head curator, and Thomas Lax and Lanka Tattersall and Legacy Russell. It's like an incredible group of like mind power. And I've been incredibly honored to be able to work with them with this. So yeah.
Well, huge congratulations. That's amazing. Maybe we have to have you come back sometime and talk about doing, documentary film and also art installations, because I always find that really interesting, and how to work with museums and
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us today and for your
Yeah.
beautiful film. It was so moving and incredible. Please keep us posted on what you're up to next, and everybody be sure to watch Time on Amazon Prime. It's amazing. Thanks,
Thank
Garrett.
you, Lisa. I appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you too. Talk to you soon.
Bye, y'all.